All right. Hi, everyone. Let me check. Seems like everything's working. So today we are talking about economy of a firm. So we are switching gears and kind of switching sides. We talked before about consumers and their choices. We are all consumers. We all go and buy stuff. Now we try to understand the other side, the suppliers, the producers, business. So we study, again, in this level, we cannot really mathematically combine them as we don't have enough kind of tool. It's more for grad school. So we kind of will have them independently. So you can see at some level, theoretically, you can see how those two things play together, but just kind of take without proof, take my word for it, that if you study a bit more math, you can actually mathematically combine them in one system of equation and derive an mathematical market equation. So you have optimizers of consumers. You can combine that with optimizers of suppliers and find a solution to that. Of course, that is what's called neoclassical setup, which is very, very simplified. So a lot of things are simplified in order to get that mathematical solution. And those are the sacrifices we make in economics as a science. And partly in the feedback for Unit 2. So again, we have a little like a week gap, mostly because you just submit kind of on Sundays, most of you. So we need some time to process that. So we have a little delay, but that's fine because our last week will be actually last 2 weeks will be just exams and assignments, no new material. So having a little delay with feedback is perfectly fine. So what I meant that economics has the simplification. So in the feedback, I'm talking about one of the assumptions is that when we talk about government, we assume the government operates nicely. We don't take a real government. As a science, economics has limitations. And those limitations, like we are not trying to figure out how to fix government. There is another science, political science, that's their job. We take government as granted to be efficient and acting democratic and act on behalf of people. And then we try to figure out, well, we assume that, and then we try to figure out if there is any solution. What's the most efficient way to allocate goods and other, solve economic problems, things like this. So when we talk about firm, we also simplify a lot of things. When we talk about consumers, simplify things, we have assumptions. That's basically how science works. We assume something that we know it's not real, but in order to understand basic relationship in science, we have to eliminate all the noise. So we have to assume a lot of things that probably day-to-day life is not very realistic. However, it helps us to understand the major movements we have between consumers and suppliers in this topic that we are talking today. So first, we will start with a neoclassical setup for firm. And then we're going to talk about what are the problems with this setup. And the setup of a firm is all about profit. And profit will put pi in it because, as you're gonna see, and unfortunately, quite a lot of words start with P in economics, and letter P is different thing. So the goal of a company in this neoclassical setup is profit. And you probably, if I ask you without any knowledge, what is the goal of a company, you probably can figure it out. You can say it's profit. That's how embedded this idea is in our society. Even though when we, the second part of this lecture, you'll see that in reality, it's never profit. No matter what type of or which side of debate you are, it's actually never profit in real goal of a company. But we assume it's profit. So we have profit, and what profit is equal. So what we are going to do, what's trying to solve and optimize this neoclassical setup, and that profit is very simple. It's revenue minus cost. In particular, let me actually write it explicitly, total cost. Very simple. So profit is the result of company's operation. Revenue is all the money the company gets from selling products. Cost is what those products cost to produce or to buy wholesale and then resell it. Whatever the costs are, total cost. So revenue minus total cost is profit. Now revenue itself, we model as price multiple by quantity, or P multiple by Q. Now, so here it is, P is price and pi is profit. That's what we have. So revenue is price multiple by quantity. You can see that, well, in general, that's very realistic. If you have a simple business where you sell some kind of tangible products, it makes a lot of sense. If you provide some services, it's a bit harder, but quite often those who provide services charge by an hour. So quantity could be just hours of time of professional, things like this. So in most cases, we can say that this model is quite real. Revenue is equal price multiple by quantity. Now our total cost, let me put it here, we divide into variable cost plus fixed cost. So this is, we see is variable cost. These costs, we divide even further to V multiple by Q. So where this is basically cost of production of one unit of a product. So this V, let me use this V is this cost of production of one unit, and then multiple by quantity. That will be the cost of production of all the units. And fixed costs are mostly investments. Yeah, it's a bit hard to read. Now let me rewrite it. So these are investments, not in production units, but rather in the factory itself, in R&D, research and development, in marketing, but mostly it's those type of investments that you need before you produce. So fixed costs are fixed. They do not depend on quantity because most of them appear before you start produce any quantity. So let's say cars. this model in general neoclassical economics is really good for tangible industrial. It was developed in the industrial age, so it's really good for industrial economics. And cars are a perfect example. So what you need to produce cars, you cannot just start making cars out of nothing. You need a factory, you need R&D, you need to develop a car actually before you start producing. So all that will go to this fixed cost. And in car industry, fixed costs are one of the largest. You need to build pretty large factories, billions and billions of dollars. That's why very rarely we see new car manufacturers. In fact, only Tesla managed to sort of break this kind of glass ceiling and become a successful car manufacturer. Other companies quite often manage to, have some success, and later they are bought out by larger corporations with those factories and already made investments. It's very hard to compete in this industry. In most industrial type of business, it's very hard to compete with existing companies because they already have this fixed cost covered. Let's say Ford, it already has a factory. It already has R&D and suppliers, dealerships and network and people. Everything is already there. If you start to compete them, you need upfront to spend billions of dollars to build that. And it's very difficult. So those are fixed costs. And then you start producing cars, and each car has, wheels, doors, and steel and leather. All those parts, those are variable costs. The car itself, and they are obviously, quite logically, they depend on quantity. So the way we divide the cost are those that do not depend on quantity, like a factory. You actually have to build factory even if you produce 1,000 cars or 10,000 cars or 100,000 cars. It still has to be a factory. Yes, you usually plan the amount of cars you plan to produce, and so fixed cost, more or less appropriate to the size of business. However, if you build a factory and didn't produce anything, you still have to cover those costs. That's basically a nature of business. Modern business, in particular, software business, is very different because fixed costs are very low. To develop a software, you just need time, talent, and computers. Even if you are talking about, let's say, Facebook, the software, the fixed cost of Facebook, which is one of the largest software companies with a lot of traffic, internet traffic, a lot of servers, and a lot of hardware. But Facebook's hardware, even with like all the fancy stuff, cost only about $500 million. And Facebook worth dozens of billions of dollars, can actually hundreds of $billions. So their fixed cost, even of Facebook, is extremely low with all the hardware. And most software business, you just start on your computer, probably a bit better than just simple laptop, but still under $10,000, you can get very powerful computer to host a development of software. So the expenses are quite low in today's modern business, IT business in particular. So fixed costs are low. That allows to develop new products faster. That's why software industry is developing really fast and replacing, we have apps now even easier. You don't even need particular set of skills, sort of like programming. You can use other programs. You can use platform provided by Apple or Android to develop your apps, which they want you to develop. So those things are generally just time. So you just spend time, and obviously you need some skills, but it's not investments. And then you have, so software is another example that actually variable costs are also not that high. So, you know, if you develop an app, then your variable cost only marketing. So usually that's where the costs are. You try to advertise your app and you pretty much advertise, even though it's not directly cost of production, but in reality, you pretty much spend all your money in the beginning to advertise and facilitate your production. So it's not really fixed cost, it's more of variable cost. The more you sell, you effectively need to spend on marketing, and just reality. With cars, it's, again, this system was designed for business like cars or steel or airplanes. So it works really clear and perfectly. You have a car itself, everything that is in that car is variable cost. Then everything that Ford or GM or Tesla has to have to be able to produce a car is fixed cost. So that's what you need to know. And now we need to combine this everything together. So you got your profit equal to price multiplied by quantity minus variable cost multiplied by quantity. I'll put like this, so fixed cost. Now, as we have Q and Q, we need to rearrange this. So we got profit equal to price minus variable cost multiplied by quantity minus fixed cost. And that is, back. All right, doesn't want me to edit, but it's still visible. So this one is pretty much the formula we're gonna work with. So you can remember it, you can derive it from simple concept that profit is revenue minus total cost. It really helps to derive so you can understand the logic where it came from. And it really helps to solve more complicated problems. It is very real. It's one of the part of economics that is theoretical, but at the same time, it's applicable and very real. So you study accounting, you will see, well, you got price, you got revenue, calculated by price multiplied by quantity, you got cost, you got profit, all those things every company has, every company tries to calculate, and we're gonna practice some of this. So why this form of equation is very important? Well, it shows few things. First, kind of the first law of business is this, that price has to be larger than variable cost. Now, so if that's not happening, there is no future for this business. That's why it's the basic law of business. Your fixed costs are fixed, that's in the name, which means even if they're too high, it's fine because they're fixed. If you have this, if your price is larger than your variable cost and the market is good, obviously there are other things that are important for business, but financially, from this economic perspective, if you can sell enough, if that's true, if price is higher than variable cost, there is always an amount of product you can sell to get into profit. And that's very important. That's also very realistic and sort of illustrates why it's very hard to get business going. And there is, in fact, a mathematical, so let me organize it a little bit more neat. So that's the law. Let's have a graph for this. So we will have quantity, and we will have profit. And if your quantity is 0, that's where you start. If you put right here, if you put 0, you have minus fixed cost. So your profit starts with minus fixed cost. And then your quantity goes up. This obviously is a rule, so it's positive. And it goes up and up and up and up and goes like this. Now this point we're gonna talk about, but mostly you can put here quantity and time because you sell more with time. So it makes sense. And that's why, so you start your business in this dangerous zone. You don't start with 0, you start with negative investments. You have to spend money, you have to spend time, you have to set up all that with nothing in terms of income. You start with negative. And that's why 90% of startups fail, because you don't start with 0. It's not let you, oh, let's try this idea, and if it works, it's good, and it's 50-50. No, you already have pressure of negative expenses. So you have to spend your own money, borrow money from family, friends, spend savings. It's exhausting, and lots of business fail. And on the other hand, if you manage to cross this point, which we will write point B, this magical point, then after that, you have completely different situation. You actually is pretty much good. You're rock solid. Until, of course, another competitor comes or something happens to the industry. But from an investment perspective, those who invest in business, in startups, if you watch like Shark Tank, they always look at this. If you are somewhere in this red zone, it's very difficult to actually even call yourself a business because the risk is too high. You only generate expenses. You don't generate any income. You're not really a business. You're just an idea, a hobby. Some people call it startup, but from an investment perspective, it might not be a startup. It might be a startup if you actually have something unique, what's called unique asset. Let's say you have developed a software, right? And it's unique. You are an author. You have legal rights for it, so you have at least an asset. So your cash flow still looks like this. You're still in red, but you have some assets that you can sell and be in green in case your business doesn't work out, basically. So you have some insurance. But purely from what we just described here, it's called cash flow. It's how money operates, how you make money, how you spend money. If you're in red, you are not a business yet. So this point B is break even. And that's what we're going to calculate in particular as well. So break even is that point when profit is 0. So mathematically, it's rather easy because it's profit is equal to 0. Because we don't have a complicated business model, right? We have a very simple business model where there is no change in market, which means we start in red and we eventually go to green. And after we cross this point B, everything is forever fine. That's type of business that we model in this introductory class. So that's why we kind of have only one problem. We need to cross point B, or as we call in economics and finance, we need to break even. And so mathematically, that's the point where profit is equal to 0. So I'm going to derive it in a bit. It's pretty easily. We still use this equation, just profit equal to 0, and then you can find whatever you need to be found. But first, just let it sink with the logic. You invest some money, you have fixed cost. That's why you start in red. You start with negative profit or losses. Then with time, you sell more and more products. And then you reach break-even point where your profit is finally zero. And after you cross it, you make more and more money because you kind of covered your fixed cost already. So now you only have your profit margin, which is this. You have price, which price is, as you are a company now in this lecture, the price for you is the price you sell. Last time you were a consumer, so for you price was expenses. Today price is revenue, and variable costs are expenses. So price is always higher than variable cost. Business has kind of meaning to be there. Otherwise, again, if price is less than variable cost, there's just no reason for this business to exist. It's not only not profitable, that's important to understand. Not profitable is like this point. It's not profitable, but you still have a business. If your price is below variable cost, there is no meaning of that business because it will never be profitable. And that's, as some of you might consider to be entrepreneurs in future, you need to understand kind of this. It's like step one, you got to check and have what's called this profit margin, operational profit margin. It has to work. Other things could be manageable. If this doesn't work, it's pretty impossible to move forward. And yet, as business is a very fun thing to study, because even this rule, which is like rule of the rules for business, even there you can find some exceptions. And one notable exception, if you study management, you might hear that case of Japanese companies, specifically Sony and Panasonic in 80s, when cameras came out and video recording devices, they were extremely expensive. The price, the variable cost, just the variable cost of, let's say, portable camera, it wasn't actually very portable in kind of modern sense, but still it were about few thousands of dollars, so like $50,000, something like this. Video recording device were even more interesting examples. So video recording device are mostly for consumers, and the variable cost was about $5,000. And then Japanese companies, and so those technologies were available in Europe, in US, in Japan, not only in Japan, in many countries, quality was around the same, technology around the same. And then Japanese companies start selling variable video recording devices with variable cost, $5,000. They were selling them for about $500, taking massive losses. And American managers thought they're crazy. They don't know anything about business. They don't know this rule number one. They are going to be bankrupt very soon. And then a year passed by, and Japanese companies still, continue to sell video recorders for $500, and the cost was $5,000. So what happened? All other producers in other countries disconnected their production because no one could compete with Japanese companies because they were selling it with massive losses. And no one, they thought Japanese will eventually also go bankrupt, so no one cared that much. And then about 3-4 years passed by. Japanese companies invested in R&D so well that the cost was decreasing marginally every new iteration. And in 3 years of these massive losses, the cost of video recording, the V, went down due to technological advancements to about 200, but the price was still 500. And now they were making a lot of money, but the entire world knew only Japanese video recording devices, only Panasonic, Sony, that's it. None of other countries can produce it or even step into the market because technology advanced too far and they lost it. And that's a kind of strategic move, very interesting strategic move, that even this rule, that sort of basic rule of business, could be broken if you know what you are doing, if you are ready to take risk and you have a long-term good strategy. Of course, one might argue that, well, in like 20-year perspective or 50-year perspective, the rule still holds, but they did kind of trick others into giving up business, and that's how they took that market. And up to these days, mostly Japanese companies control video recording, video cameras, Canon, Nikon, all Sony, all Japanese companies. No one really can catch up with that. And that's due to this kind of long shot strategy. And in fact, after that case, that became illegal. This strategy became illegal on international level. So now, let's say if you US companies, you try to pull this trick in Europe or Japan, or those Japanese companies try it again in US, that is called dumping, and that would be, it's not illegal in terms of like criminal illegal, but it will likely cause some sanctions on your company in form of tax. So if let's say, Sony tries something like this again, then US will likely to introduce a specific tax on that product to sort of level out the field for other companies that produce the same product in other countries and in US. So it's a little side note to illustrate that all business laws are not really laws. They work, but sometimes people break them and win. And because business is more of an art than a science. Economics, however, is a science, and we try to assume we follow these simple rules to understand in general what's going on. A simple rule: price is higher than variable cost. So let's move to break even first, and then see what we can do. So I will write again, get price equal to P minus V, Q minus fixed cost. So what can we do here mathematically? So what your problems will be very simple. Let's change. You got 1, you got 2, you got 3, you got 4, you got 5. You got 5 unknowns in one equation. This means your problem will look like this. Given 4, find the 5th. And could be any 4, and you should be able to find any 5th. Mostly you can figure out that the most reasonable question is, what's the profit? Given the other 4, you can figure out what's the quantity, which is quite common problem. In fact, what's the Q? I will write. So it's like types of problems. A, B, C. So fixed cost, not that much, but that you will see. So now we can see here we have break even. And that is same problem, but you got 0, P minus V, Q minus FC. So little rearrangement, you will have this. Now you have 4 unknowns, which means you pretty much eliminated one of the parameters with this. So you can give in 3 and you can find the 5th. And quite often break-even questions. So here you can have just simple break-even. So what's the Q when the company breaks even? Type question like this. So what's the quantity given prices and variable cost when the company breaks even? You can have also time related to this, and you can have some combination. So you can say what's the price given if you want to break even by selling the 10,000 units of a product. So what's the price? You can figure out logical question. So it's a real, even though it's a very theoretical thing, it's very real as well. Logically, when you are a producer, you go to the market, there are certain things you can change about your business and certain things you cannot. In this formula, it's quite obvious that you can change price and quantity because you go to the market and you can set up the price. You can sell it for $5, for $10. You can also figure out the quantity, which mostly are connected together because these things are rather fixed. If you can reduce variable costs, you will reduce variable costs. So mostly it's technological. If you could spend less money on investments, well, you will spend less money on investments. So to have a factory, well, you gotta spend some money. If you can spend less, you spend less. So fixed costs and variable costs are not something you can decide. It's rather technological and other market restrictions, and that's given to you as an entrepreneur. What you can decide is the price of your product and the quantity of that product that you are going to produce. And those decisions, that is actually a one decision, that you have some marketing inputs and you have some also variable cost and fixed cost. You have some financial restrictions. For example, you go to a bank, you want to borrow money for your office, and they tell you, well, you got to start making money in 3 months, otherwise you're going to take everything back and you're going to be bankrupt. So you have a time pressure. So you know the quantity you need to make. You can see a market price, you can see time pressure when you want to break even, and so the quantity is kind of decided for you. So those, again, that's how business, the economic part of business works. You need to make this decision. That's it, actually. That's it for economy of the firm. We don't make any other. There are other things that are more financial. There are other things that are related to understanding market, how market behaves. So this price could be linked to your behavior. So that's what we miss due to our mathematical limitation. We miss that as an entrepreneur, you can study market and you can figure out a mathematical law of how consumers make their decisions about the price. If it goes down cheaper by 10%, what you're gonna, how much people buy. If a price goes up by 10%, do people buy less, more? How other competitors behave? All those things are economic questions that just require a little bit more math to deal with. So we are not going to do that in this course. That's about it. But you need to understand these very basic things. You have how business decisions work. You have your business, you have your costs. You cannot really influence that much. Mostly, if you're a small or medium-sized business, almost even a large corporation have very little they can do about their costs because they're already optimal, right? So if you are not optimal, let's say you're an old company that operate on 20-year-old technology, and there is a new technology that is more efficient. So then there is something you can do about your cost. You can actually borrow money, so you will have increased fixed cost, but reduction of variable cost. So let's say if you buy new equipment, your variable costs go down by half. But that new equipment means new investments, means increase in fixed cost. So there is a trade-off, but in most cases, as you can see, as companies do improve their technology, mostly it makes sense. So those type decisions could be, but in short term, medium term, costs are fixed. What you can do almost every month, and actually most companies do that at least once a month. Some of them do it even a few times a month. Clothing retailers change price twice a month, sometimes again. Some online retailers even every week. Every week they figure out the price for like new dress and they change it based on demand. So like you saw the fast fashion, you saw how fast and efficient they are. They figure out the price in even not even in week, every day. Like there was like celebrity goes on Met Gala in a dress. They try to put this dress on sale, and of course the price, the first week they put that dress there, the price will be higher because quantity is limited, the price will be higher. It's just a new product. And then 2 weeks pass by, maybe even 1 week, it goes on sale. And then 2 weeks go by and goes further on sale, and then it becomes cheaper. So all these things are economists, people with economics degrees sitting there in online stores, seeing how many people buy, how many people, they see ads on Instagram, right? 10 million people saw an ad. I don't know, 10,000 people clicked, and then they see, well, out of 10,000, only 100 people bought, but 10,000 people were interested. So the sale go, 1 week goes by, price goes down. Oh, now you got 300 people buying this dress. Good. And then push down price again. And then you see, you decrease price by 10%. And at some time, actually no one new bought it. Like the impact is very mild. Then you see, well, probably that sale does not result in increase in quantity. So we are losing money. You can see this dilemma, right? You can increase the price, but the quantity goes down. So we study behavior of consumers, right? If the price go up for a normal product, the demanded quantity will go down. So that's the dilemma for firms to decide. And that's non-linear dilemma. So that's a little difficult mathematically, because it's not that you increase price by 5% and quantity goes down by also 5% or 10%. It's mostly non-linear. And that is mathematically challenging, but it's also very challenging to actually figure out the right price and quantity. But that's the job. That's we have statistics, it helps. We study some features in Excel. We also later in this course introduce the concept of elasticity. That is about that helps to make that decision with price and quantity. But for now, just remember the formula this one. Remember the type of problem, so you can find what's the profit, you can find what the quantity, if you want to make $1 million in 1 year, whatever, how much you need to produce, and types like this. So the other type is time. So what, basically when the firm or the company will break even. And the time you figure out usually given monthly production, for example. So very realistically, break even is mostly time. And that's linked to finance. That links to the fact that fixed costs in real life are almost always borrowed money. And when you borrow money, same as you borrowing money from a bank, you pay monthly interest. So you don't really care about quantity per se, right? You care about how many months I have to pay interest on my fixed cost before I break even. That is very real financial question that when I was in the industry, I had to answer for all my projects. Very kind of crucial question. And from financial perspective, even more important question than all others like price and quantity, those are economic questions. Financial questions, when the firm will break even. And again, not what's the quantity, but when, the time. Because you borrow money, you pay monthly interest rate, you have to pay back as fast as possible. You need to know time. And so you have monthly production possibilities. If you produce 1,000 units per month, then you can transfer the quantity into time. Again, in our examples, very simple. You just simply given, the car factory produce 10,000 cars per month. How long will it take it to break even, given all other things that the quantity is, let's say, 100,000 cars. So you find the quantity from the equation, and then you transfer the quantity to time using the simple explanation that monthly production capabilities. Mostly monthly, because we again finance operates in monthly terms. We pay interest monthly. We borrow money mostly with monthly payments, and business also operates monthly. Technically, business operates quarterly, but every month they still, most businesses collect their prices, variable cost, quantities. So month is a good thing and makes things simple. So that is theory. Now let's see some questions. So let's say we have a company and we have, let's say, let's take Tesla. So let's say Tesla wants to build a new factory. Okay. Now the factory, I don't remember the giga factory cost, let's put 20. So it costs $20 billion. All right. Now the factory will be able to produce a standard in car industry. It's about 200 to 500,000 cars per year. That's what it will be able to produce. And we know that Tesla currently price is about average price. Let's put $40,000. per car. Variable cost, we also know, in fact, Tesla is one of the cars manufacturing that enjoys the best margin between price and variable cost. It makes quite a bit. I would put $30,000, but it might be even more. Of course, all this real data classified, and no one will really tell you unless it's very low. The difference is very low. So for Ford, for example, they kind of claim that the difference is never more than like 2,000-3,000. That's why, because they use it in marketing. They tell you, well, this car, we produce this car and sell it for 30,000, but we only make 2,000 of this car. If that's true or not, we don't know. But more or less, if they're transparent and they try to be, it's more or less true. But for Tesla, they don't really want you to know. But we know it's higher than Ford and GM and most other car manufacturers. And that's why Tesla stock is so overvalued, because they've been able to make a lot of money on their cars, even though they sell by far less cars than Ford and Chevy and Toyota and most other major manufacturers. So this is our price, variable cost. We got fixed cost. We got quantities. And let's have some questions. So we can have when Tesla will break even. Question number one. You can also set a profit. Let's say when Tesla will make $100 billion. You can have questions like this. In fact, as you can imagine, it's kind of the same question, because break even is just profit equal to zero. $100 billion in profit, you just put in a different number, but the process to solve it is pretty much the same. So I always suggest you to just write down the formula. So you have profit equal price minus Q minus fixed cost. Where did it go? Come back. Here you go. This new updates. Apple always like to update. So we got the price. This is 40K. This is 30K. Now we know the quantity, so we have time. The quantity will figure out for 1 year. Okay, for break even, we know this is zero. So we need to make some choices, right? So this is gonna be zero. This is when we need to find. So this is our X basically. And this is 20. So it's 20 billion. But as I use thousands, 20 million K. It's not the best representation, but it's mathematically easy to solve. So you got 20 million here, you got 40 and 30. So now we need to solve for, okay, let me rewrite it here. So you got here, you got 10, okay, Q, 10,000 Q minus 20 million thousands. And we can rearrange and put it here. So we got 20. Right, so we can cancel this. We can cancel 1, 0, and the Q is equal to 2 million. Yeah. It actually would be easier to cancel this one, but doesn't change the result. So the answer is 2 million. We will break even in 2 million. Not the final answer because 2 million is quantity. We go back here and we produce 200,000 cars per year. So kind of part B, how long? Well, we have time is equal, basically, we need to divide 2 million by 200,000 and we'll get 10 years. So we're gonna get 10 years to break even. And that's it. So time, you got overall, you need to produce 2 million cars. We know that for 1 year, we produce 200,000 cars. So 10 years to break even. Quite a long time. That's more or less realistic numbers for such businesses as car manufacturing. However, it's quite profitable, so it's worth the wait. Now that's, let me don't call it B, let me call it like part 2, something like this. And this actually B would be related to this is A and this is B, right? So this is A and this is B. And the part B was when Tesla will make $100 billion. So we have pretty much the same problem. It just instead of 0, we put 100 billion. So we have 100. So we can just, where's the formula? Here's the formula. The same formula, just instead of 0 here, it's 100 billion. So we have 100 million thousand. We already simplified 10,000 Q minus 20. Okay, let's use 20 billion. So really, so I got 100 billion equal 10 KQ minus 20 billion. So it's pretty much the same after simplification. It just here you have 10 KQ equal to 120 billion dollars. And yeah, you can actually make it easy. So this 10 is gone, and then K makes B into millions. So the answer is Q equal 12 million. And then we do it in one, yeah, I think I want to be in one page. So I'm gonna move this right here to give me a little bit of space to finish it right here. So we found Q is 12 million, same thing, time. Now we have 12 million cars to produce, and we still produce 200,000 cars. So the time, cancel this, 120 by 2 is 60 years. So that's quite a long time. So probably If you're an investor and you expect company to make that amount of money, it will take 60 years in our example. So not the greatest investment. Usually you want to at least break even. You know, if you want, again, cars are different because it's a long-term business, and yet more than 10 years, it's unlikely to be interesting for anybody. So this 10-year break even is kind of borderline in our example. And of course, to make real profit, 60 years, quite a long time. But yeah, so that's the quantitative part. Now you can have a little break and we'll continue to talk about companies, but more on sort of qualitative side. So the quantitative part, we're done. Those are the type of questions you'll have on your math quiz and on your final exam. So as you can see, the course is kind of divided into various parts, as economics is. We have mathematical, we have 2 math quizzes, and that's only solving problems like this, solving problems like utility problems, and later on we'll have some other problems. Then you have essays and discussions. They are more qualitative, talking about different problems, learning how to use economics to understand a little bit better how problems appear, why it's hard to solve them, and at least economic solutions could be there and understand them. And presentation also, it's what's called applied skills. Those, if some of you are planning to work for business related to finance or economics, those are probably the most useful parts straight out of college. So they're all useful, obviously, but let's say discussion on how to solve climate change is useful if, for you to choose career, possibly. It's useful for a long term, maybe 10 years from now, you'll accumulate kind of knowledge and you will use it. But if in terms of kind of hard skills, as they call it, straight out of college, get a job in related field, those presentations are exactly what's expected from you guys if you are a business major, especially if you are economics or finance, even more like that. But even general business major has to be able to analyze data in Excel, and that's the most required skill that we hear from employers now and in the past. That's it. So that's why it's kind of a variety of different assignments, and it's fine if you're good with one and probably not that great with others. It helps you also to understand yourself better. Maybe you're not a philosophical person and you don't like these debates and discussions, but you're really good in like solving these things. You think, wow, this is amazing. And just like you got an answer. And you don't need to debate. There is just one answer, one correct answer. That's math. That's partly why neoclassical economics is so strong, because it relies on math, and every controversial topics it just eliminates and assumes, like we did with governments, like assume something that you need and then you find a solution. It's just, an approach. And as I mentioned, on the other hand, if you enjoyed market analysis, that's really good, because that's a type of job that pays well. That's the type of job that are really out there straight out of college. So that's something to look into it. If you did enjoy it, you need to think and find a little bit of what you want to do in your career, because that's, if you enjoy the discussions and debate, for example, but you don't enjoy that, that's great, but you probably would need to go to grad school to find a career where you can apply those skills of debate and discussion. Maybe go to government, as I mentioned in the feedback. It's quite real and interesting path. Maybe most of you never thought of this, but it's an opportunity. All right, so now as we finish the quantitative part, we understand profits are important. Now let's talk about real part, real business. Real firms do not target profit. In any case, and as you see, we have actually two different, radical different, and to a point of battlefield, different approaches to what company wants, but none of them is profit. And the battle is divided between what's called shareholders capitalism and stakeholders capitalism. All right, and the difference is, so the names are quite close. We got shareholders and stakeholders. However, as I mentioned, it's very, very different, and people are debating this with great passion. So the goal of a company is from these two approaches are either shareholders' value or stakeholders' value. So we don't target profit simply because it's a flow variable. So profit, we make profit. It's like your income. You make money every month. If you put a goal, your income, well, you can increase income easily this month. You can go to a bank and borrow $1 million, you will have $1 million. So it just fundamentally doesn't make sense to target a flow variable as your goal, because your goal is something in the end. And flow is something every month. If you put your goal something every month, then the first month you go to a bank, you borrow $1 million, you have $1 million, and that's the kind of optimal solution. And after that, yeah, you're gonna go bankrupt, but because we value now more than future, that mathematically will result in optimal solution. So profit is not great because, well, what profit? Today's profit, tomorrow's profit, 1 year from now, 5 years from now. It's a flow variable. And in general, as I mentioned, goals are something long-term at the end. We can have a short-term goal, but still it's a point. It's what's called a stock variable. You need to have a point in which you have this estimated, whatever it is. So instead of profit, shareholders' capitalism or shareholders' value is somewhat related to profit. So people who like profit or who say profit is the only important thing, in reality, they mostly transcend to this one, shareholders' value, which another term is stock. If your company is traded on stock market, it's stock price. You want your company to be as more expensive as possible, effectively, because as owner of the company, that is what you have. And so, yeah, profit is great. If you study finance, if you go to finance, even Finance 300, you will learn that they're quite related. Theoretically, practically, profit does correspond to increase in shareholders' value. So let's say you increase profit, well, your stock price is likely to go up. You decrease profit, likely not. But as well, if you can take this course, you will learn that about half of US corporations that are very successful have terrible profit, like Netflix, Amazon, Facebook for a long time. They're kind of non-profits, like they were losing money all the time, and yet they're extremely successful, and their stock price goes up. So that's a trick that, you know, it's for another course, basically, that debate. What you need to know that while economists like to think of profit, reality is a bit different, but reality is also very interesting. We have shareholders capitalism and stakeholders. Now, shareholders see this as firm. Okay, well, I actually can have one graph and just two colors explaining what are the difference. So I got firm. Okay. This is the firm. Firm belongs to shareholders. Firms produce things for consumers. Firms also operate in the environment of government, or let's put, I think it's a bit here, it's a bit easier. So what's called a micro or industry, which are competitors for microenvironment. So you can, as if you remember, we talked that in microeconomics, industry, it's like the top level. So microenvironment is your industry, your competitors is your microenvironments, and also suppliers, where you get materials, stuff that you need to produce, maybe buy wholesale products, things like this. So suppliers, competitors, some other industry players, associations, things like this. And on the other hand, you have macro environment, which is government and society as a whole, which I would also put in the more recent decades environment. And this is the goal. So let's not use nice green color for this, guys. As in general, we are not much fond of shareholders capitalism. That's why we're gonna use little orange here. So shareholder capitalists believe that the whole existence of a firm is to provide value for this shareholders. So owners of company can, and the company itself can operate with entire focus on providing value to its owners. That's a view which frankly is quite American in a kind of historical and legal tradition. That is the view that dominates the United States. That company exists, or at least it dominates, again, legally and in reality. It doesn't mean that all Americans agree with that, by far not, but it still dominates, especially if you go to other regions, which are Europe and Japan and South Korea, where it's different, where we have stakeholder capitalism. Now, stakeholder capitalism is more complicated because it believes that the company contributes and has to satisfy everyone. and has to provide value to everyone. But it sounds good, like now that I'm saying, it seems like who would argue with that? Well, there is argument, because in stakeholders capitalism, if the company is not good enough, basically, for all four players, or for type of players, for everybody, then it doesn't have a right to exist. So we talk, in debates, I see a lot of discussion about freedom of entrepreneurship. Well, that's effectively a battle. You, as a shareholder, if you can have, so again, you ask quite strong on that. So owners company can do whatever they want, even if they harm government, society, environment, consumers, suppliers, and competitors. They still can do whatever they want. Now, other countries, especially Europe and Japan, well, in Canada and Australia, pretty much most other countries with different levels, they operate in different belief system. They believe that whatever company is existing, it has to contribute positively to all of the players. So if the company contributes positively, let's say only to, let's choose some, let's say company gives shareholders good value and it provides consumers good service, but it harms environment, basically takes from environment. Then stakeholders capitalism say, well, we got a problem. And the company doesn't have a freedom or a right to exist in this form. There is basically a right from each group to limit the freedom of shareholders to run their business. And that's a big battle. That's why, there is no really right answer to this, especially universal. You see, universal answers and debates like what's the right thing to do in general, I really don't like it, because there's always a case where you can see, well, you see what happened, and that's why stakeholders capitalism is bad, or shareholders capitalism is bad. So it's very tangible, discussion. It's very easy to be wrong in general, as well as right. But for each particular company, we can have a meaningful discussion. For example, in relatively recent news, Facebook generates great value to its shareholders. It's quite useful for consumers. And in fact, even let's say if you use Facebook, right? Let me get red. So Facebook, good. Okay, we'll remember this and we'll write a new one. Facebook. So I'm gonna use green. It's good for shareholders and good for consumers. And consumers. So it's great. And again, consumers, you might debate that it's not great, but we have another, as you remember, we have society. Actually, here we'll have two. We have society negative and government too, on different occasions. So we'll take consumers as positive of those people who willingly using Facebook, knowing what Facebook is doing, which at this point is quite well informed. But society in general had a lot of issues because of Facebook. There is a great documentary on Netflix, Social Dilemma. If you haven't seen it, just like a must see, about Facebook and how Facebook ruins society. And it's not just a term, it's like a practical actions, and not intentionally, actually. Some of the things related to teenagers and violence, and some are intentional, But that particular documentary about social dilemma, it was mostly unintentional. It was just to make money. They were making money, and what they basically did, they were actually harming government more than society. They were selling our data to different parties, well, political parties that a little bit kind of, it started not with manipulation with elections, but with basically engineering the elections. So it's a very kind of intelligent, smart, you gotta give them that. Those Cambridge Analytica, the bridge company, but it was borderline. They actually were relatively within the range of not doing crazy things. But then what happened? Russian KGB bought the same database on the market. So Facebook sold, sort of, they didn't know, but they were selling the data to everybody. And among that everybody was KGB. And then KGB bought data, and they don't follow any rules. So that's where the misinformation came in. That's where the bots and a lot of mass in political information appeared from Russia. Their goal is sort of quite clear. We can see now, very obvious. They don't want to live in the world that we all live in. They want to build their own world of totalitarianism around the world. And they were managed not to steal or hack or something. They just bought legally from Facebook 5,000 data points of every American. What you like, what you don't like, where you live, what you buy, where your credit cards are, all that information were just sold to hostile foreign intelligence on the market. And that is tremendous loss to the government in terms of security, and in fact, that's how they shut down it, because not the US, by the way, not the US intelligence, but British intelligence shut down the channel because they have a law that well, you gotta watch the documentary. There is a law that justified shutting down the company if it poses a threat, and intelligence gathering is a threat, which quite interesting because Facebook is still doing that. And again, it's debatable whether gathering information is a security threat, but in UK it is, and that's how the whole thing was shut down, and that's how the documentary was made after the thing got shut down. So very interesting, very informative. But for our course, that's the situation. Facebook, real company, real situation. It generates great value for its shareholders. We can argue because the service is free, it generates value for consumers, because if not, you can just leave it basically. However, it's quite clear at this point with multiple scientific evidence that it has a negative impact on society through specifically teenagers, and it has negative impact on our security because they profile people and they sold that to foreign intelligence. What are we going to do here? And that's the type of practical question. Should we regulate it? Should we cut down these things somehow and impose legal restrictions? Or that's fine as long as it makes money for shareholders. Open question. But shareholder capitalism answer is clear. It's not within rights of anybody out of except the shareholders to decide what the company's future. And partly you can see that, I mean, you can see in the news the idea that, well, you as a consumer can sort of influence and log out of Facebook, and a lot of people did after the documentary. In fact, it was like millions of people shut off their Facebook after the documentary, to a point that Facebook sued Netflix for that documentary. That's how harmful it was. So we can argue again, it's mostly kind of freedom of decision making, which is very valuable argument. I like freedom, but I also can see that if you deal with Russian intelligence clearly buying, profiling every American citizen with the help of a company that doesn't have a clue what's going on, and or maybe they have but they don't care because they make billions of dollars, it's never easy to figure out. If you saw, so Mark Zuckerberg was testifying in Congress. It doesn't know anything, as he said he doesn't know, or he just lied because he made a lot of money, or because his lawyers told him to say what he said. But the result remains. They did a lot of harm to US security and to our society. So shareholder capitalism answer, we can't do anything. The only we can do through not using the service. However, the stake, let's see, something else. Stakeholders capitalism says if there is any red link, if there is anyone who is disadvantaged, we have a right to shut down the company, because we live in society where we are at a level of development where we don't need this company. We don't need companies that brainwash teenagers to do crazy things and sells intelligence to or profiles to foreign hostile intelligence. We just don't need it. Life would be quite fun, quite well without Facebook. So we can shut it down, or we can impose any restrictions we want until we make it all green. So the stakeholders capitalists basically said that the company, it puts a lot of pressure on company, that's for sure, but it says that business should run in a way that it benefits everybody, that it benefits society and consumers, and has good relationship with government, not in a way that they corrupt government, but again, in economics, government is good. It means they pay taxes, they contribute to what society values, and government as a representative of society economically tries to achieve. But mostly it's, in this case, it's security, but more often it's taxes. Basically, company has to pay a fair share of taxes. And on this side, we have competition. So that's another thing. The company has to treat its competitors fairly, not trying to eliminate them, to reduce competition, or to eliminate them in any unfair, unjust way. Same with suppliers. Amazon is really guilty of kind of bullying its suppliers and trying to squeeze everything from them, as quite often most large companies are like that. If they are large, they have market power to squeeze everything from their suppliers and make them almost bankrupt. So all these debates, that's basically a debate. And each particular case is very interesting. In general, as I mentioned, in general, it becomes pointless to figure out which one is better. But in particular, let's say with Facebook, what should we do? Should we do nothing, or should we do something? Another case is very, very interesting. It was about Apple. Apple, as well as other companies, but there was a time about 4 years ago when Apple was making a lot of money. Was the wealthiest company on earth. I'm not sure it's true today. It might be true today actually as well. I think it's still the most valuable company. I'm not sure about how much money they make, but they were, at that time, they were making most money of all companies in the world. And that's not a problem. The problem that they didn't pay any taxes in US and in Europe. And they also borrowed money. So they are the wealthiest company on the planet, and they're borrowing money. And they're borrowing money to manipulate their stock price, which is, again, question for finance class. It's a little too complicated for economics and not that relevant, but that's the fact. They borrowed money, manipulated the stock price, didn't pay any taxes. And the way they do that, the way all companies do that, is very simple. An international company can do it very, very simple. They create a profit center. So Apple, for example, you all think that Apple is an American company, and its headquarters is in California, indeed. However, the financial center of Apple is in Ireland, where actually I happen to be right now. It's in Ireland. And why it's in Ireland? Because Ireland is a nice place, but also Ireland has zero interest tax on operations outside Ireland. So Google, Apple, Microsoft, and many, many other international companies are actually headquartered legally in Ireland. But again, other companies had less money. Apple made a lot of money and boldly didn't pay any taxes in Europe, in US, anywhere else. They had this idea that we have good, smart lawyers and accountants. We don't want to pay taxes. So how they do it, they put all the money in Ireland effectively. And then they say, well, our US branch didn't make any money, and our Chinese branch didn't make any money, and we are all poor, and only our Irish branch made $60 billion. And that's how smart Irish people in Apple are, something like this. It's all legal kind of accounting tricks to avoid paying taxes. Everybody knows that, but they're legal. It's not that they're illegal. They're quite legal. If you're an international business, it's very difficult to prove that you did something illegal, but it's possible. So what happened? It's a very bold move, because most companies try to hide this, even though they're doing it's legal. And by the way, a very important notion in general in economics and for business, you need to know how laws work and not what's legal, what's not. With taxes, it's extremely interesting, because most things technically are legal, but it's illegal to do those things if your intention is to reduce your taxes. So in this case, it's very hard to prove usually. And that's all it kind of falls on country and regulation and how bold they are. And that's where the difference lies. So Apple did that to US and to Europe. Same thing. Didn't pay taxes, said we are poor, all our money in Ireland. On accounting, you can see $60 billion cash earned in a year, in a few years. Just laying there, they borrowed money in US to repay, to manipulate the stock price. US did nothing. European Union sued Apple and said, you did it to avoid taxes. You can say it's legal, you can say what you want. We believe you are avoiding taxes. You're out of European Union. That's it. No iPhones in European Union. You are criminals. We don't want you there. That's the attitude. And Apple said, I'm sorry. Here's all our taxes. I think they pay about $2 billion fine. And they paid the tax right away because, of course, they won the market. So that is another example. When the company, clearly very good for shareholders. As consumers, I personally don't like Apple, but I know many people like their products, so no complaints. we can assume that no complaints, people still buy, shareholders good, consumers good, competition maybe also not too bad. Samsung is not really complaining on Apple. They kind of sue each other all the time, but more or less it's fine. So, but society also maybe not too bad, but this particular government and taxes was an issue. And another, as you may recall from here, environment is one of the biggest recently. If a company is doing it, great for consumers, suppliers, competitors, society, shareholders, but destroys environment. Do we have a right to do something about it? Stakeholders capitalism says yes. Shareholders capitalism says no. Each particular case, and it's much easier to decide. For example, we have, let's say, food production. This week's essay is on food production, so you will see Tyson Food operate in the United States. They do not operate in Europe or Japan because they would be outlawed, and they are outlawed. Actually, US chicken is outlawed from most countries around the world because of Tyson business operation. That you're going to see for your essay. So that's another example. Yes, they make a lot of money. They're the most financially successful company, meat producer in the world. But on what cost for everybody else, including environment in particular, and suppliers in that case is a big deal. You will see what I mean when by kind of abusing or squeezing suppliers, and there are no competitors left. So that's a problem. So that's what you need to know about terms of shareholders capitalism and stakeholders capitalism. Again, each case, sometimes stakeholders capitalism goes too far because, the world is not perfect. What if a little bit of harm to environment, is necessary? What if we cannot handle, we are not living in a perfect world with perfect technology and things like this. So sometimes some things happen and it's very hard. Sometimes quite often government is the one that implements the restrictions on this through either laws or particular actions, like in case of Apple or Facebook. It was a particular action of a government authority and kind of different authorities, but that's how we know about those cases. So sometimes goes too far and limits, for example, Tesla. Tesla is a great company. It would be very hard for it to run business in different countries. It actually tries to do that, but it also runs differently as many US companies. They have different policies to accommodate different countries' regulations. But the problem with how they treat staff, the problem with kind of corporate culture and things like this, they exist. By the way, that's environment, the micro environment is also workers. I forgot to add, but it is extremely important. So you got here your so this part is also very important. And of course, again, in ideal world, I think we can all agree that it would be nice to have stakeholders capitalism and everything produced and cheap and nice and everything's happening. But in reality, the hardship is because SpaceX wouldn't fly to the moon or to Mars if it was in, let's say, Europe. Just too many restrictions. It wouldn't allow Elon Musk to do what he wants, and many other things like this. So there is debate. There is a great area. We are not perfect. We don't know what's the best, but we do have situations where there are problems. We try to solve that. Situations where there are lessons to learn, kind of optimistic side. For example, like Elon Musk and Tesla. Okay, just let him do what he wants, and he did quite good things to some extent. Now, as he kind of supposed to get a bit more responsible with the amount of power he has, economic power, and we'll see what happens. But again, it's not easy, because this type of question is per case. That's what I argued for you to learn, that general debate between these two things very easy becomes pointless. A particular debate, like what's the right thing to do in this particular case with this particular company, with Facebook and with Amazon in this case, what to do, should we do anything, but gotta be careful with the regulations, because could be too much. You also gotta be careful without regulations, because that's Wild West and could be too bad as well. So that's the challenge for economics and economic policies in the real world. The real world, not that easy, because each particular case, each particular time as well. There could be time when certain things, certain policies are correct, certain decisions are right, and time has changed. New challenges, new decisions. So yeah, that's what you need to know. And another term, finally, we need to have another term to learn, which is economy of scale. So another term is economy of scale. Economy of scale is kind of more related to the original topic of this mathematical equation that we have here. Oh, this one. So I'm going to rewrite it. Just for you to understand. Even though economy of scale is not directly linked to this mathematical equation, as for me personally, it's easy to understand. For people who understand math, it will be easy to understand how it works, because it works practically, mathematically through this formula. So what is economy of scale? It's a fact, an economic fact, or a pattern that with quantity going up, basically, I wouldn't put V, but total cost divided by Q goes down. That's how it is. That's what economy of scale is conceptually. So conceptually, the more you produce, total cost per unit goes down. The more cars you produce, your cost per car will go down. And mathematically, that is easy to show, because your total cost, your variable cost multiplied by Q plus your fixed cost. So total cost divided by Q is V plus fixed cost divided by Q. So, right, because of this, if Q goes up, total cost per Q goes down, because this part, the fixed cost. Actually, let me leave this, then this overall goes down. Now, that's economy of scale. It is not just a mathematical trick, something like this. It is extremely important to know, it's different for each business. It's extremely important to know this concept, to understand it, and to understand how it impacts business. It contributes to the fact that it's very hard to start business right here, because not only you start with fixed costs and all these challenges, you start with zero Q or low Q, which means your costs are significantly higher than your competitors. But the more mature your company gets, the better your cost structure will be. You will have your units produced cheaper. Total cost will go down per unit. And that allows you to companies. So that explains why competition is not very natural, because big companies can produce things cheaper than small companies. And the bigger they get, the cheaper they can produce them. And so monopolies are way easier to build, because if you already produce, dominate the market, you have the cheapest product for the same quantity, for quality. So it's just mathematically cheaper. Now, there are some research that says, well, people of course study economy of scale quite a lot. Economy of scale, by the way, of IT industry is extremely remarkable, because the moment you produce a software, let's say, any new download of that software won't cost the company much. So if you're a mature company like Microsoft or Apple with the Apple software part or division, or Google, it's almost impossible to beat this company, because their cost per unit produced, they produce millions of software, billions actually, units. And the cost is just the development cost divided by those millions. So it's like how much Microsoft costs. Well, if you calculate how many people bought it per unit, the cost will be like less than 1 cent, less than 1,000 of 1 cent, just almost zero. So how can anybody compete it who just getting started? Almost impossible. And same, but to smaller extent, is true to all businesses. You produce cars, well, yeah, but Ford and Chevy, those established companies, they already have cost. They have a great economy of scale, and they have cost pretty low. Research quite extensively shows that it's not forever, which is a good thing for our markets. Otherwise, we would have just one company in the world producing everything and having all the power, having this largest economy of scale. And economy of scale has limits, mostly due to people's limitations and management limitations. What's became known over time, especially through 20th century, where we had corporations like General Motors, General Electric, with multi-layer structures before computers especially. Those things are almost impossible to manage. And so they're losing economy of scale at some point. Yeah, it's technically or mathematically here, you don't see it, but you can imagine it, right? If your company becomes larger and larger, you need more and more managers. Management is not very, like hierarchical bureaucracy is not very efficient. Your decisions become slower. Decision process is very slow. So you become, as a company, very hard to operate, very hard to make decisions that are fast. And so smaller companies faster, and they can outbeat a larger company. So there are limitations that companies like Google and IT companies in particular, they try to beat this problem because they're all afraid of this problem. They're very large, but they don't want to be large. So they try to operate like a society of small companies. So if you study how Google operates, and one of the leaders in this type of management is sort of like a collection of venture startups, and that sometimes have a conference and talk to each other. But YouTube operates separately, Google Search separately, Google Capital, which just buys good ideas, separately, and they all have teams about 10 people, no more than that. So they have like a tiny, small startup company within this large, massive company, trying to be fast and efficient, and still difficult, but interesting to see. Overall, economy of scale is that fact or kind of pattern that we see. Mathematically, we see explanation there. We also, I just mentioned why there are limitations to that. And from business perspective, for kind of economics to business knowledge that economists contribute is this economy of scale. As you can see, it's quantifiable. So you can see and calculate for your company how much you can save if you produce more. And for strategic decisions, it's very important because mostly, let's say again, cars. Most cars, so you got Ford and Toyota, you got large brands produce, their economy of scale is 500,000 cars. So effectively, if you, a car manufacturer, produce less than 500,000 cars, then it cannot cost compete with the existing manufacturers. It's non-linear because it means that cost of car cannot be cheap. And cheap car today's world is about $25,000-$30,000. So effectively, if you cannot produce more than 500,000 cars, your car cannot be cheaper than $30,000. And that's why car manufacturers that do produce less, they're all luxury cars. Yeah, Ferrari produce less, but they cost a lot. And then you have car manufacturers that kind of handpick and produce just 100 cars a year or even 20 cars a year. Those cost millions. Well, not millions, but $500,000, somewhere around that area, and $2 million like Bugatti and what's Koenigsberg, the Swedish one, the fast McLaren, all those cars, car manufacturing, they don't have economy of scale. So they have to go to luxury segment and produce very few high quality products. But you can see how non-linear it is. One McLaren, it's about $200,000. It's, Toyota Camry, okay, manageable car with all the pack, it's $30,000. It's not really that better. It's not 10 times better. It just, they have no capacity to make it cheaper. So McLarens are expensive, they're unique. But if you look at like technology, they are not 10 times better. Quite often they're actually manageably a bit better. They're more unique rather than better technologically. But that's how most things are. Same with clothing and other things. So if you handmade clothes, that will be expensive. That will be times expensive than a normal clothes, even though it's not really times better. It is better, but it's not proportionally better to how much more expensive it is. So economy of scale is a very useful, it's kind of tool that managers use to figure out the place where you want to be. And that's how you can compete with companies, even if you have a powerful competitor. It explains that, let's say you compete with, like Tesla competing with Toyota and Ford and GM. They do not compete on price. It's impossible for Tesla to compete on price. They cannot make cheap cars. So they don't. They make better cars. They make electric cars, which still they are leading in electric cars in many ways. So that's their feature, but they're not cheap because they know they don't have economy of scale. They cannot compete on price. So economy of scale allows to understand entrepreneurs what's their ability to compete on price, to make products cheaper. And mostly only large companies, that explains it. Large companies compete on price. Walmart, Costco, largest retailers in the US, they compete on price. That's where the cheapest products are. Now you go to Whole Foods, it's growing, but it's not cheap. And again, it's not proportionally expensive. It's significantly more expensive for a little bit better quality. But our income distribution is also like that. We have significantly more wealthy people present in our society, not just, let's say, average income is about, I think average wage is about 30,000 something in the United States per year. Well, how many people make more than 100,000? Not a lot, but in certain areas, in certain locations, cities, in region, they're quite a lot. And you can see their consumption behavior change. They make more money, they go to different stores, buy different products, and that's where the competition is. And it's quite also coming from here, business learn that people, they don't shop in Walmart if they make certain amount of money. So it's reasonable to compete with Walmart, not by being Walmart, but by finding a completely different income group, basically. Not having economy of scale, you cannot compete on price, you can compete on quality. So yeah, the economy of scale also shows that while you can compete on price, it's like complementary. Yes, your price will get cheaper. Your quality is unlikely to get better the more you produce, because you pay less and less attention to each unit. So that's how business is sort of divided. You have massive production of mass consumption products, and then you have small farms, small companies that produce clothes, cars, anything. And those things are more expensive disproportionately. That's because of economy of scale. They have to compensate for large companies having economy of scale and they don't. So it's not just linear, it's non-linear. And that's why luxury products are significantly more expensive than average product for consumers. All right, that's it for economy of reform. Let me know if you have any questions.